Legal issues, questions and answers. Throughout this course, we've examined the history of fair housing, discussed the protected classes, reviewed enforcement procedures, and explored the Realtor Code of Ethics. Let's finish this chapter by looking at several practical situations Arizona real estate professionals may encounter. These examples illustrate how fair housing laws apply to everyday transactions. Can a landlord refuse to rent to a prospective tenant because the tenant uses a wheelchair? Answer: no. A housing provider may not refuse to rent to an otherwise qualified applicant because of a disability. Federal and Arizona fair housing laws prohibit making housing unavailable because of a person's disability. A landlord should evaluate applicants using the same lawful rental criteria that apply to every applicant. Can a seller refuse to consider an offer because the buyer intends to operate a licensed sober living home? Answer: generally, no. Individuals recovering from drug or alcohol addiction may be protected under fair housing laws when they are no longer engaged in the illegal use of controlled substances. Refusing to sell solely because the future occupants are recovering from addiction may constitute unlawful housing discrimination. Each situation should be evaluated individually, and legal counsel should be consulted when questions arise. Can a seller refuse an offer because the buyer has young children and requests that the seller install a pool fence before closing? Answer: probably not, but for a different reason. The seller is generally not required under fair housing laws to install improvements requested by the buyer. Instead, the parties negotiate those items as part of the purchase contract. If the parties cannot reach an agreement, either party may decline the proposed terms. The refusal is based upon the requested contract terms, not because the buyer has children. Quick quiz. Fill in the blank. Fair housing laws prohibit making a dwelling unavailable because of a person's disability, but they generally do not require a seller to accept every contract proposal made by a buyer. Can a homeowners association enforce a no pets policy against a buyer who has a qualifying assistance animal? Answer: not necessarily. Assistance animals are not considered pets under the Fair Housing Act. If the animal qualifies as a reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability, the housing provider or homeowners association may be required to make an exception to an otherwise valid no pets policy. Each request should be evaluated individually using current fair housing guidance. Broker tip: many fair housing questions do not have simple yes or no answers. Instead of making legal conclusions, identify the fair housing issue, explain your role as a real estate professional, and encourage your client to obtain legal advice whenever necessary. That approach protects both your client and your license. Online discussion question: why is it important to evaluate each fair housing situation individually? Answer: every transaction involves different facts. Decisions should be based on current law and the specific circumstances, rather than assumptions or stereotypes. Question: why should licensees avoid giving legal opinions on fair housing issues? Answer: fair housing laws can be complex. Licensees should recognize potential issues and recommend that clients consult qualified legal counsel when appropriate. Question: how can a licensee reduce fair housing risk during everyday transactions? Treat every consumer consistently. Follow company policies, avoid assumptions about protected classes, and seek guidance whenever uncertain.